Oh, hey, what's going on, guys? Danilo Caprick here, aka the best dressed man in tech sales. Don't forget it. And today I'm very, very excited to welcome you guys to the village that my father's family has lived for the last 300 years. This is a place called Mironja, located in the municipality of Han Piesak, located in the country Bosnia. So, with that said, I know you guys are probably enjoying the scenery, but let's get on with the video. So in today's video, we're going to talk about the question that I feel like is asked very, very commonly these days. And that question is, does that make sense? And we're going to talk about why this is not the greatest question that you can ask. And more importantly, what questions you should ask instead. So with that said, let's get into it so you can get these insights. All right, folks. So I don't know about you guys, but in the software sales world, I will hear executives, salespeople, all sorts of audiences and different titles of folks explain something, ramble about something, give some sort of explanation on something, and then all of a sudden they say, does that make sense? And I think number one, this phrase is just played out. Like so many people are saying it, and it's starting to become meaningless. The other thing I would mention is that based on the community that I have on LinkedIn that I see, a lot of people are starting to commonly say that this has a negative connotation when you ask it. Meaning that when you ask someone, does that make sense? It almost implies that you think they're stupid or they don't get it, and you need to re-explain something to them. So for those reasons, I think that this phrase, this question is becoming a little bit played out, but also it's getting more of a stronger negative connotation. And for those two reasons, we should probably stop using it or do our best to avoid using it whenever possible. And really quick, put yourself in that situation. Let's say somebody explains something to you and then they ask, does that make sense? You're probably going to say yes all the time, because if you say no, then it implies that you missed something and that you maybe aren't as intelligent. And nobody ever feels super comfortable saying no to that question. Everyone's always going to say, yeah, it makes sense, but maybe it really doesn't. And they're just afraid to say no. So that's the other thing I want to point out with this question, is that it puts people in a very uncomfortable situation where they can't give an honest answer all the time. So because of that, it's best that we avoid this question and we use some better questions that allow people to be vulnerable and not have this fear of looking uninformed or unintelligent. So what can we ask instead? Let's get to it. I got 1, 2, 3 specific questions that we can ask instead of, does that make sense? The first question that we can ask instead of, does that make sense, is, does that fully address your question? Right? Think about it. Let's say somebody asks us something. We give an explanation. Instead of saying, does that make sense? We can just say, does that fully address your question? That is a way better question to ask, because it allows them a really nice opportunity to say, it answers part of my question, but there's this other part that I'd like you to maybe dive a little deeper on. And it doesn't require them to say, no, I didn't get it. No, I'm not fully understanding what you're saying, or no, it doesn't make sense. It allows you to just say, yes, but, or yes, and I'd like you to go a little bit further into this part. So the first question we can ask instead of, does this make sense, is, does that fully address your question? All right, guys, the second question that we can ask instead of, does this make sense, is, first you say, hey, I might not have explained that the best, but was that pretty clear and easy to understand? And this works because first you put the blame on yourself, right? You eliminate the awkwardness or pressure on the other person to understand, and you say, hey, I might not have explained that the best, but was that pretty clear and easy to understand? And now you give them the opportunity to be like, well, yeah, at the beginning I wasn't really following. And yeah, could you go over this part? This was unclear, right? Because you put the blame on yourself first, you take pressure off the other individual and allow them to be vulnerable and tell you honestly, hey, no, you know what? This part was unclear. Could you revisit this part, or that part, right? So that is a nice technique that we can use to, again, remove the pressure from the other person, put a little blame on ourselves, and allow people to be more vulnerable in their response. All right, guys, the third and final question that we can ask instead of, does this make sense, is there any part of what I just said that you'd like me to revisit or dive deeper into? And this is better than saying, does this make sense? Because when we say, does this make sense, it's very black and white, right? It either does make sense or it doesn't. And it doesn't allow the person to say, well, I just want you to re-explain this one part, right? And that's the opportunity we give them when we ask this question of, hey, is there any part of what I just said that you'd like me to dive deeper into or revisit? It allows them to pick just the certain portion that maybe went over their head, or maybe they were multitasking, maybe they didn't get it, whatever it is. But it allows them to pick a specific portion and just say, hey, yeah, can you talk about this again? Instead of saying, yeah, the whole thing didn't make sense, right? Because when we say the whole thing didn't make sense, it has a stronger negative connotation on us because it implies that we didn't pay attention or we just didn't get it, or maybe we're not as intelligent, whatever it is, right? But again, this is advantageous to us and to the listener or the person we're speaking with because it allows them to pick the certain portion as opposed to admitting that the whole thing didn't make sense. So there you have it, guys. That is my take on why we should avoid asking the question, does that make sense, as much as possible. And instead, these are the 3 questions I highly recommend you ask instead. Number 1, does that fully address your question? Number 2, I might not have done the best job explaining that. Is there any part of that you'd like me to go over again? Number 3, is there any part of what I just said that you'd like me to revisit or provide more detail on? So there you have it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video, and now you're armed with a couple of new phrases to say instead of, does that make sense? And the last point I'll emphasize again is that by not saying, does that make sense? We also differentiate ourselves as salespeople and as individuals because we're no longer using common language used by 99% of other folks in the field. So with that said, let's be different, let's stand out, let's use this language to our benefit and also provide a more positive experience to our participants and listeners. So guys, hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please hit the subscribe button below. Also, if you're not doing so already, go follow me on LinkedIn. And last but not least, if you are trying to break into tech sales or you're already in tech sales and you want to learn some new techniques to differentiate yourself from 99% of sellers in the marketplace, go ahead and check out the B2B Syndicate, see what we got cooking up over there. All right, with that said, guys, hope you have an amazing day, and I will catch you all in the next video. Take it easy now.